but we will hold them off until the end of the session. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so don't worry, we'll get to your questions. I'm extremely honored to have with us today Mark Bodman. He's a Senior Product Manager service with ServiceNow and the Open Group IT4IT Forum Chair. I'll let Mark tell you a little bit about himself a little bit later. And so without any further ado, we will start the presentation. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much. Great to have you all here, and appreciate the invite to talk to you all about IT4IT. All right, so just a little bit about myself, just so you understand my background. I kind of came up through the development ranks at a number of large organizations out there. My last organization is where IT4IT actually got created, which is Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Serving there as an IT4IT strategist, that was my responsibility was to take that new standard, a new budding standard, and get it out in front of folks. It is a new standard in the industry. There's not a lot of folks that are aware of it still, and a lot of but you're finding pockets where it's been discovered, and companies like ourselves, HCL, Oracle, are starting to adopt it. Big companies, small companies, and we're evolving the standard. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So it's a continuous process here. But my background is enterprise architecture, and that's the product area that I am vested in here. And of course, since that picture was taken, I've grown a little bit of facial hair, so I look a little different. But yeah, that's me. The agenda today, we're going to talk a little about how folks are using IT4IT to improve service portfolio management and other areas. I think one of the areas where IT4IT was created for is to be able to have an end-to-end service approach to what IT does. So we'll talk a little about that. Learn techniques for implementing in a more bite-sized increments. What we found is the standard was created, but we didn't really provide guidance on how to use the standard. So application was sort of spotty, and we learned a lot about how folks used it over time, and we're starting to package up guidance on how to use it. I'll talk a little bit about that. How can it lower your costs and risks? The beauty of the standard is it bakes in a lot of things that you are maybe afterthoughts, so you can have forethoughts about things that you need to do in IT to address cost and risk issues. And then last but not least is a better understanding of the reference model and architecture itself. So this isn't meant to be a training session at all. This is really meant to be a primer just to give you enough information to be dangerous, but you can go off and get more information out there. There's educators that do provide training and certification for the standard. So this is a bit of a primer.
Should we give our first polling question just to see how many people in the audience have heard of IT4IT?
Yeah, that's a really good point. We have that ready to go. So if you want to go ahead and kick that off real quick so we just see what the results are.
Absolutely. You should be seeing the polling question on your screen now. I'll give a few minutes for you to put your answer, and then we'll share the results after that.
Yeah, so should I just keep going while we're collecting answers and then return after a slide or two?
Absolutely, and I'll monitor it. When it starts slowing down, I'll go ahead and share the results.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so a little bit about the standard itself. It was created around these key premises, and what we needed to do is have a true service portfolio management approach for IT, which kind of baked in service management from the very beginning of the process all the way to operations. So that was one of the key areas that we had to focus on. We wanted to make it standardized, and this came a little later in the construction of the standard. It was born out of a situation where HP had acquired a lot of software from various companies, Peregrine, Mercury, all of these IT organization tools came together into one huge suite, but there was no standard way of interfacing all of them together. So customers that bought a lot of software from the one acquired vendor, right, all these acquired vendors, it wasn't constructed to work together. So the idea was to standardize the integrations and also how the software should to work from end to end. addressing financial controls in the operating model itself. That was a key element. And then last but not least is this end-to-end approach for IT to focus on the business outcomes, because IT never really thought about themselves as part of the business, which we are, but we support the business as well as now are providing products to our end customers or our users, or in your case, maybe citizens, right, for the federal market, for the service for citizens.
Hey,
And
Mark,
I'm going to pause right here.
yeah, we actually have the results. I'm going to share the results. It looks like we've got a 60-40 ratio, which is a pretty interesting that it evened out to exactly 60-40, but you see 60% have not heard of IT4IT and 40 have. So
excellent. Yeah, and that's indicative of what we're finding. You know, when I go out and I talk to folks indiscriminately, over half have not really heard of it. And that's because a lot of folks work in one area. You're working in the planning organization where you're planning what IT invests in and where the issues are and figuring out what the budgets are. You're in the build organization, which is all about development, testing, and getting new products or services into the market. Run, where it's just the break fix. And the one that's really new here in the construction of IT4IT is deliver, which is a self-service delivery capability, which is separate than run. Traditionally, IT shops would mix deliver and run into one group, but as a result, break fix always takes precedent over optimizing and automating delivery functionalities. So plan and IT4IT kind of took plan and created it as a value stream, so we understand how to optimize what planning really means. It's understanding your strategy and coming up with the portfolio of services you need to run the business and provide outcomes. Build, same thing. It's requirements to deploy now. So once you know what you need to actually invest and create, how fast can you get it out there? And it doesn't matter if it's an agile process, if you're sourcing, if you're building things internally. It's once you know what you need to do and the clock starts ticking, how fast can you get it out there? Run becomes break fix, which is detecting and correcting for anomalies with your services before, ideally, folks even know there's a problem. So this is kind of important because, of course, that's the value of these services once they're stood up. Meeting SLAs, being able to provide that service, which is being dependent on to run businesses and monetize your product. And last but not least is deliver, which is all about requesting and fulfilling the IT experience engagement. So a lot of organizations, they would have different catalogs for different things. So you would go to one catalog for one set of services, but another catalog for another set of services. And very low maturity, it wouldn't even be a catalog. It would be a form, and somebody would have to process the form, figure out what to do. This focuses IT on that experience of engaging and ordering those services, but also automating the fulfillment processes behind it. So now we have 4 value streams that describe what IT does around service to be able to provide outcomes and optimize those outcomes. When you look at the actual IT4IT value chain, the value chain is made up of these 4 value streams. And it's plan, build, deliver, run on the top there with strategy portfolios, requirements deploy, request to fulfill, and detect to correct. But underneath that, you have all these what we call supporting activities. And these supporting activities are all about the things that cut across the different value streams. And the idea here is that we want to be able to optimize for using and leveraging value streams in context of those 4 value streams. So these supporting activities, I'm sorry. The other thing that's also very interesting, I think, is and probably the most compelling aspect of the standard is something called the service model backbone, which is the very center of the entire standard, and it basically articulates things from a planning perspective at service, what a service is, through building, delivering, and then running that particular service in an operational context. And so the service model backbone binds these things together in a way, much like your own human backbone, and of course the nerve centers of being able to take what you want to do in your brain and carry it to all the your limbs in the body. So this is how a lot of, I would say, executives see IT4IT, and where the value stream definitions kind of come together in one picture. The next level of detail is what we call the functional model or the functional component model. And when we get down to this level, people start to identify with what functional area they work in. And IT4IT wasn't created for people specifically. We don't replace all of the standards and the work, the type of work that's done by people, but it's really focusing on that unit of functionality to manage the work and also to capture data, the metadata about the work, and of course, this service that you're building. So over in strategy portfolio, for example, we have things like enterprise architecture, policies are set up and managed there, both from an external point of view. Every organization is subject to certain external policies and regulations, and how do you turn that into a decision criteria or requirement as you process those. Scope agreement to portfolio demand is just your kind of intake, and then at the bottom is your service portfolio itself. So this is where your collection or inventory of services becomes really critical, and I call it the cornerstone of the whole framework, because if you don't know what services you already have and how they're performing, how are you going to know what to develop and implement based on the your business's needs or your department's needs? So all this is really predicated on understanding your current services. Requirement to deploy is very much like what you would see in an SDLC or Agile process. Agile, you would combine your defects and requirements into what we call a backlog. But this isn't process. This is a process agnostic framework in that we know we need to collect these things and we treat them a little differently. The data model basically represents the interaction between these elements in the data model, and then be able to manage the work happening from left to right, especially through this service model backbone. Request to fulfill is probably, I call it the disruptor value stream, simply because this is the area where most organizations don't have a lot of maturity. And it starts with this idea of offer consumption component, and that's how do you actually engage IT through a shopping experience, and how do you aggregate services so that individual services can be strung together and easily consumed. A good example that we use here at ServiceNow is HR onboarding. And as you know, when you start working in a new company, there's a lot of things you got to do, but usually those things aren't strung together. You usually get a checklist, and it's up to you to go and hunt and peck and do all the things you need to do to be a productive employee. So this is kind of the critical first step, is have that engagement with your employee or consumer of your service to be very worthwhile, worthy. The other thing that are in request to fulfill that's worth pointing out are things like chargeback, showback. Many organizations don't really have an ability to understand what the cost of that service is, or if the service is brokered from another company, to be able to transparently show the cost of that service back up. And then coupled with that is usage, and this is really important too, because if you are not using a service which costs the company money, you need to be able to relinquish that resource back into your pool so other folks can actually consume it, and you can cut costs that away. Offer management is also another area that's really important that most organizations don't do a great job in understanding and organizing their offers, what's being consumed. And catalog composition, same thing. How do you actually get to the offers? How are those all organized? And then, of course, the last key component here is the fulfillment execution component. And this is where the domain of wherever that service is coming from. If it's external, it's a brokered thing. How do you engage that external service without a lot of manual effort? And then be able to capture what's been allocated based on tracking subscriptions, kind of taking your allocation of resources, whether it's internal or external, and then understanding the subscribers of that resource. So I spent a little bit more time on request to fulfill just because this is sort of the game changer, I think, where IT4IT makes this a key element of your strategy or organization. Last but not least is detect to correct. This is where you've got the problem, incident change, very much ITIL oriented. And then, of course, things like configuration management as that foundation from an operational standpoint. And along the bottom is the service model backbone. And conceptually dreaming up new services, that's when you're planning, you don't have a lot of detail, you don't have the physical information about what that service is, but you can certainly use the current actual service if you're changing an existing service, or you decide to, let's say, divest in in an area of the organization, what all goes with it? What's the footprint for those services, and how does the infrastructure get affected? Those dependencies get affected by those decisions. So the service model backbone is really a compelling aspect of this, and it's an area that also is still not well defined in the industry. This is an area where, of course, the language that you use from a strategic planning perspective through operations is different. Now, UML somewhere in the middle. But the point is, all of these are different points of view and different practices that address different needs. And rarely do we connect all the dots very well in terms of what we're building and how do we model that. This is an example of all of the different practices, and there's about 400 practices and standards that are referenced in this architecture or embedded. And a good example of that is there's a ANSI standard for cloud computing. I think it's 800-146. But those standards are baked into the request to fulfill value stream. They're kind of realized by that value stream. But the other ones, like COBIT from a governance standpoint, TOGAF for EA, your SDLC processes, DevOps processes in the middle from a planning and execution standpoint, and then ITIL largely here on the right for detect and correct. And we do see some new frameworks like Verisim that are coming up over there in the kind of the ITIL space. And a lot of these practices aren't made to work together. So if anybody here has been certified in multiple practice areas, you'll find an overloading or redefining certain terms, and it becomes really confusing when you try to make them all work together, especially with tools and automation, because what you call a program or in SAFE is different than what you do in PMI. And so those fundamental differences make it very difficult to integrate systems that perform the work for you. And at the bottom, of course, you've got various languages to describe the service. At an architectural level, RKMA and UML from an execution implementation, and there really is no standard from an operational standpoint. Every vendor has their own CI model, and that's usually driven based on the discovery and population of that model, but rarely is there is no standard that covers that, so everybody's got their own way of doing things. The next level of the IT4IT framework gets down into this level 2, where you identify the flow of work that happens between those components. And you also see the ERD, the Entity Relationship Diagram. So how does EA, Enterprise Architecture, interface or relate to, for example, the conceptual service? It may describe the conceptual service, but you still need to be able to carry that information forward to the next step in the process. Likely policy too. So whoever's working on your policies, your governance process will impact your service portfolio in some way. So anybody that lived through PCI or SOX or now GDPR, for example, new policies are being set, and that influences exactly how you need to invest and close the gaps within your portfolio. So this is a strategy to portfolio, and all of those interfaces are there. The blue boxes being the components that are specific to this value stream, and the gray ones are either other value streams, or they are in some cases external to IT, like labor management. That would be your HR. And when you have a proposal to change something, and that's going to be approved, right? It's an important thing. You need competencies. So HR systems can provide that competency picture. So just some examples here, but there's a lot of use cases embedded and addressed in this framework, in this architecture, and this is a good place to kind of get into the meat of what the standard really means and how it's applied as you start looking at what you do or don't do against this architecture. And in that regards, it is a reference architecture. It's not meant to be taken on verbatim. This is very much a way to compare, contrast what you do with this architecture to see what you do, where your gaps and opportunities are. Likewise, requirements to deployment. I'm not going to go through this one in detail either, but all of those same components in the flow of work is articulated here. The entity relationship diagram here as well, and of course those purple dots representing the service model. Request to fulfill, I kind of went through that in some detail, but you're able to see the same sort of flow here. As employees or consumers of your services engage, and of course those the shopping cart, the thing that you want as a service, the offers that you consume, are consumed, turned into subscriptions that you're tracking and managing over time. And then detect to correct, right? Break fix, and how Monitoring feeds into event feeds into incident, which feeds into problem, and so on and so forth. So all of the flow of work for each of these areas are important. And the value that I've seen in using this kind of diagrams is you may see a symptom of a problem downstream from the source. And the problem a lot of organizations have is you got different folks that own pieces of the puzzle, pieces of the process, that don't necessarily understand what those upstream points, things are or should be. So this architecture is a really good framework to understand how those dependencies work or should work in a ideal situation. Here's some examples. So this is a standard that has been on the market since 2015. And it takes a good 5 years or so before a standard becomes mainstream. So even the standards you're using at home, like 802.11ac, have been out there for many years, and it takes a while for the manufacturers to get behind them, and of course customers to want them, and the infrastructure to come into place, and we're no different. And this is a good example of some of the bigger customers that I've worked with over the years who have adopted the standard and started to think about all of these areas. The one in the upper left-hand side is a famous manufacturer of airplanes. I can't tell you who they are. Shell is very prominent in IT4IT. They were one of the instigators and reasons we have the standard. FedEx is also another company I've worked with in the past. I like the way they've actually depicted the standards as these conveyor belts. And the one in the upper right-hand side is another very large retailer, one of the largest ones in the world. And they think about IT4IT as well. These plan, build, acquire, deliver, and run. And then they place some layers on top and below, which is very similar to what we've done in IT4IT as well. So these are examples. There's a lot more out there. We've had about 20,000 people that have downloaded the standard itself. So there's a lot of examples, I'm sure, that we just don't even know about. But it's exciting to see these and have get some of that feedback, having been with it for so long. Now, what are the common use cases? How is the standard used? First and foremost is that standardization of tooling and automation of tooling and integrations. We see that as sort of the main thing folks can identify with once they see this. They identify where they're not doing something well, and the standard provides some details to improve those areas. Tools rationalization is probably the most common use case overall, because once you understand the things that you do holistically in IT, you can start grouping the tooling that you use from various vendors, which is usually the case, or even homegrown tools. And one of the things that we're doing in the IT4IT forum is creating guidance papers on how to take the IT4IT framework and use it in that context. So there is a tool rationalization guidance paper. It's almost complete. It's in a review cycle right now. So you'll see that coming out shortly. Functional maturity assessment is something also that I've seen, and there's another standard I wanted to mention called Digital Professionals Body of Knowledge. It's a sister forum to IT4IT within Open Group. And the thing that's really neat about the functional maturity assessment is that you need to understand the scale of the company, and DPBOK, which I just referred to, has established a scaling model. So at a small scale company, you don't need certain things like enterprise architecture. And so the level of automation, level of maturity of each of those functions is going to be pretty small. And so they've provided a view using IT4IT to say, well, in a small scale organization, here are the critical components, here is the non-critical. And then they've taken that all the way up to enterprise, large scale enterprise. So there's a nice synergy between other standards that are building on IT4IT as a core, and putting it in context of, in that case, of digital professionals. Roadmap planning is also very important, because once you understand these dependencies between different functional components, it's easier to plan and prioritize where the work goes. There was a CIO that I worked with on the West Coast. It was at an engineering tooling company, but what they did was the CIO was a bit confused about what's most and least important. By looking at it through a value stream perspective, we're able to kind of target what is the most important a step in the value stream that for you right now. And so we prioritized what those investments are based on looking at the architecture, not just the squeaky wheel trying to get more budget and resources. And last but not least is the new IT operating model. We're finding that organizations need to have the way they work centered around the IT4IT framework, especially these 4 value streams. If you don't have a staff that looks at request of a fill, for example, it will always be a disparate hodgepodge of independent catalogs, and fulfillment may never be automated. But if you have somebody in the organization at the top level looking at that value stream as a key focus area, that customer experience, then you'll see improvement, obviously. So we're seeing the use in operating models quite frequently as well, and the reason we're putting guidance around this, so we're now documenting that. That's a work stream that I'm leading right now in the forum. So a little bit of a commercial there. If you wanted to join this effort, that would be great. We're going to have examples, we're going to have guidance, and we're going to have a executive overview of how and why IT4IT is important as a ingredient in your IT operating model. And here's some examples. This is an example for where we went in to look at a particular organization and all the tools that used in certain functional component areas. And this is an older version of the standard. Some things have changed since this was published, but the example still holds. And what you're seeing is where they have a lot of, this company had a lot of service monitoring tools. They wanted to get rid of some of those tools, and some when we were doing the workshop, they didn't even know what they were, but they know they were being used. And we made recommendations. So not only rationalizing the tools, but the integration of those and leveraging those tools more to greater value. So here's where we identify where these monitors were integrating directly to pagers, instead of going to an event management system where the root cause of an event could be identified automatically. So this is just one example. Every time I've gone into a company to do this kind of a workshop, you find opportunities like this, and it's the reference architecture that you're able to compare, contrast, and identify what really is going on. This is another example working with Safeway. They're pretty big out here on the West Coast. And this is pre-Albertsons acquisition. So this is a little bit old, but the use case stands. And when we looked at their rationalization of their tools, right, we took all of their tools and we stacked them up into the different functional areas, functional components. And we found where there's too many tools, in some cases almost 300 tools for monitoring alone. And they really didn't have anything for catalog. They just had no investment there. And it was an area where they needed to beef up, right? Those are some of the opportunities. And I just wanted to put another shout out here for Safeway. The gentleman that I worked with at Safeway, his name is Chris Genowine. He went on to actually he's now working at Oracle IT, and he's basically doing something very similar at Oracle IT. So we're already seeing like the second, even third generations of folks who have adopted it in some way move on to their next gig and have applied a very similar manner to make big changes. And now I like to call this the meaty bits of the standards. When you look at a standard, what makes IT4IT a standard and not just a framework is the fact that it has these functional criteria, these statements, shall, may, might, will, statements that you can test yourself against and identify whether or not you're meeting the criteria and how automated can you do this? So the one here that I chose just to show you the meaty bits is really the demand functional component. And if you don't understand demand management, it's capturing your backlog items from your business. That's pretty much what demand management is all about. What needs to be done, you collect it in a big demand queue, and then people are funding those demands based on prioritization and budget. But the next one is very interesting because it actually dictates that you shall capture backlog items from your problem management activities. So if you're not doing problem management, that's gap number one. And then the second one is, are you integrating those problems back into your demand funding process so that those problems can be addressed if funding is required? So just in two statements, we've identified something that could be very meaningful for looking at how you perform the work in IT and making that much more efficient going forward. And there's 433 of these statements, which are meaty statements like this, some very simple like the first one, but some that really require, in some cases, multiple products to be integrated in a way that is much more automated. And I just want to provide some context on how ServiceNow has stacked up. So when I came to ServiceNow around a little over 2 years ago now, and we never really went through that kind of evaluation, the functional criteria evaluation. So middle of last year, I started that effort to look at every one of the 433 criteria in the actual standard, and look at the percentage of coverage. How well do we cover that, from not at all to we do that 100%. Yeah, we definitely cover that. And it came up with an out-of-the-box perspective of about 59% of all of these criteria can be met out of the box just by using ServiceNow products, which isn't bad because we didn't create ServiceNow around this architecture. But if you think about our market and where we are, this actually was pretty productive. Likewise, when we went into looking at the configurable stuff, so we can configure and go beyond what it is we're doing, it was easy to configure another 7% of the functional criteria based on just making tweaks to what we ship. So this is how we're using the framework internally here at ServiceNow, and other organizations that provide IT tooling are going through a very similar situation where they're comparing themselves against the framework and finding where they're doing something well or not. And then the other thing that I wanted to kind of point you to, there's a lot of material that's in the market now. The Open Group is coupled with a publisher, Van Horn Publishing, and there's material for the architecture. It is an open standard, which means anybody can actually go log in and download this, or just acquire the books, right? It's all open stuff. And there are trainers that are available that you can go and get training and certification on the standard. And there's also, I would say, material. As a champion in your organization, you can download some material like these quick cards on the right, which allows you to use them in a context of, let's say, a workshop where you're trying to educate some folks internally and leave some material behind so that folks have something to reference on their desk, for example. So a lot of that stuff in the Open Group. And to get that information, you can go to the opengroup.org/IT4IT. That's the public site. And if you're lucky enough to be a member of the Open Group, there's a lot of, the Open Group has something like 800 members overall. And a large percentage of those folks can access IT4IT. This is where you go for the internal forum work groups, so you can get involved there. And I think that's pretty much what I had planned for this session. I think I'm about 40 minutes in, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to leave this this time for answering questions.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the presentation. Let's do our last poll if we can. This is, for those of you that have heard of IT4IT, are you, and I'm sending the poll right now, are you using IT4IT in any way? I will give you a few minutes to vote on that. I'll ask the first question while people are voting. This is from Mary Mulvihill. She's asking, so with the recent release of ITIL 4, it incorporates architecture as a practice and references IT4IT, as well as portfolio management and project management. When you're referring to ITIL, they overlay over that detect to correct area. Are you thinking around ITIL version 3?
Yeah, this was the presentation I presented was ITIL v3, and ITIL v3 also has a strategy book that was not well adopted. As a matter of fact, I got to talk to some of the authors of that book, and it was recognized they really hadn't gotten it right. The other thing I wanted to mention too is ITIL v4. There is a discussion going on between the parent company of ITIL, who is now v4, and the Open Group to be able to to work together. The biggest challenge we have is ITIL is a for-profit thing, and the Open Group is not. So the relationship needs to be that the for-profit organization needs to be a member of nonprofit and work that away. But we are in that discussion, and we're having discussions with the BRM Institute, very similar, to integrate their way of thinking into IT4IT and share collateral. DevOps, there's some DevOps organizations that we're actually talking to. and ITSMF. So there's because of the, I would say, the utility of IT for IT in all these different areas, there's a lot of interest across the board.
Excellent. Let's stay in touch, Mark, because we have future webinars planned with DevOps and BRM specifically. So it'd be interesting to see to continue this relationship. I want to share the results. We had one person say that they actually been using it for a while. So if you want to reveal yourself, shoot me an email directly. Maybe we can look at some opportunities to share what you're doing. And then the rest have either not at all or dabbled a little in it. So surprising at all, Mark, or about what
No, not surprising. I mean, it is, like I said, it's a new standard, and vendors haven't really adopted it other than maybe HP. We have a few blogs on it, right? BMC has a few blogs, but think about this standard came about because of the disarray of IT tooling, and there is really a need for the IT tooling to work together. And no one vendor has a complete answer today, even us, right? I just showed you what we're able to do. So there is a need to automate and integrate more smoothly. And we're still working on that, right? We're still trying to get the word out. But ultimately, it's down to you, the customers, the folks that are buying tools, that are looking at practices, to dictate you want these things to work together. And I like to think about it, you carry a smartphone in your pocket now that's got all these things integrated, right? You got a camera, there's GPS, there's a music player built in. You don't carry around multiple devices anymore and fumble with all kinds of, integration woes. That's the experience customers want, even IT folks. And as IT becomes squeezed for resources, you're forced to kind of optimize how you all work together. And now that IT is producing products for your external consumption, not just for internal users, it becomes even more important to be more efficient and effective. So I think this is a future framework that will be used in a big way in the future, and you're going to see other practices layer on top, like the digital practitioner's body of knowledge, and ITIL, who's really looking for this as a basis for their ITIL v4 practices.
I'm going to ask a kind of a question that dovetails on what we've been talking about with ITIL and IT4IT. How do you reconcile that, in ITIL version 3, there is a life cycle for service strategy, which correlates to strategy to portfolio, but when you overlaid ITIL, you only overlaid it over the detect to correct. Could you talk a little bit more about that, and really more about generally contrast IT4IT to ITIL?
Yeah, so I would say that most organizations that I talk to, so my background is enterprise architecture and working in that space, right? That's what I've done for the last 15 years of my career. Services has never been a part of that strategic level planning. At best, we would have some services understood. It would be very much pigeonholed as an operational context thing. And when you're thinking strategic planning, you're always thinking application portfolios or applications management, products, right? Those are the things that you're thinking about from a planning and investment perspective. Service is sort of a secondary notion. So part of what we're evolving is something known as digital products, which combines the notion of what an application is and the application lifecycle. Because when you buy somebody's code, or you build code, you deploy it, you're using it, right? And when it goes away, you remove infrastructure. But the services, the consumption aspect, the operational aspect, is again just pigeonholed to the delivery, maybe delivery and operations. So service strategy never really took hold, even though it covers that from a book standpoint. If you go out and ask 100 customers, you'd be hard pressed to find 5 that actually implemented the strategy book. And I've asked a lot of customers in my career.
I think that kind of addresses Dana Miller's question. I don't know if he's still on the call, but I believe he's in enterprise architecture. So it makes sense. He asked the question, was the primary motivation to develop the model to synthesize all other models that don't appear to span all of the value chain?
Yeah, in short, yes. And this is some unfinished areas of IT for IT. We don't have a description of a conceptual service that goes from that conceptual point of view all the way through operational point of view. We're just to give you a little another sort of point of view here from ServiceNow is we've created something called Common Service Data Model, and it does do that. But it is our internal way of doing things. And I'll be transparent, we're thinking about donating that as a standard and having the industry adopt and evolve it, because this idea, again, goes back to we're not going to be the only player for the whole thing, in most cases. There's always a need to interface with external suppliers that may not have ServiceNow, and also we don't have all of the functional components along the way. So there's always going to be a need to have a better integration experience. So we want to be able to maybe turn this common service data model over to the open group or some other open body knowledge. We're just discussing that right now, and make that a part of the IT4IT, or at least a referenced part of IT4IT. But yeah, we're getting there. This is a huge, to me in my career, having been an EA over IT tooling for a lot of it, there's never been anything like this to kind of show you end-to-end how everything works. And it's been something that I welcomed, and I found early in my career at HP as an invaluable tool to express what we did as a company, right? Here are the things that we do, here's the things we don't do, and how they integrate or don't, right? So that's to be very frank.
So Mary's question is tool specific, but I want to make this kind of a broader question. So her question is, how is IT4IT be reflected in the platform? So is it in what is called the IT Business Management Suite or on the roadmap? And if you're not a current customer of ServiceNow or you use another vendor, can you implement IT4IT in, well, maybe not necessarily in the tool, but in your practice?
Yeah, so the first question, where is it represented? To be frank, it's not. There's a couple of blogs that we put out there to at least elevate the conversation per value stream. So what are the areas of the product that maps to those areas of the value stream? So there's that. And like I said, we really didn't have a way of describing the service. Now we do with CSDM. So there are some things that you can go to. The second part is around other vendors, and can you use it with other vendors? Absolutely. I came from Hewlett Packard, and they're the one. That's where it was created at HP, and I've seen CA, VMC, and a number of other customers and service providers that are using this today. It comes down to just educating yourself, using the terminology, and looking for products that support both the functional components, right? So when it calls out for demand management, are you doing these things? It's not to replace PMI and all the things that define what demand management is, but it is to say, here's what the tool should do, and here's how they interface upstream and downstream so that demand management becomes part of the fabric of IT. It's not a standalone thing, which is really what a lot of vendors have done.
So go ahead and submit some additional questions in the Q&A. We still have time. Another question that came in, how can I get help just starting with implementing IT4IT? Seems kind of overwhelming, and how can I start, and can I get some help for starting?
Yeah, so there are a number of consulting companies that are starting to provide, like I would say coaching, mentoring, that sort of thing, but also training. I think if you take one of the standard training courses that are available, if you go to the open group and you go to the standard area, there is a registry of certified trainers, and you can get trained on this. Now, there's different levels of training. Some folks that have experience, some that don't. They're just kind of, they learn the standard and they train you to the letter. So you'll get different, I would shop around a little bit to get that. And then, of course, vendors like us, go to your IT tooling vendors and ask them, because I'm finding that folks like HP, us, and other vendors out there are creating a consulting, or at least some go to customer delivery practices using IT4IT. So it goes back to you as a customer of IT tooling from companies like ServiceNow. You're the ones that have to kind of hold us accountable and make it easier to consume, and to kind of get you on board. And if you think this is worth doing or worth pursuing, it really comes down to you. We're very customer focused, as most vendors would be, right? You need to hold us accountable to help you get up to speed as well.
Thank you. So Susanna's asking, is there a presence of higher ed institutions who are leveraging or using this information?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the early contributors for IT4IT is a higher ed guy now. He teaches at St. Thomas University. Charlie Betts. Some folks here might have read about him or seen his name. So he's in the educational area. Now, I don't know if the higher ed organizations are using IT4IT, but I know they've contributed to creating it, which is I think a good factor in itself. Using it, I can't say I don't really see a lot of higher ed customers just in my role today. I have to imagine that there is some uptake, and also for any of the, I would say, federal or public companies that are out there, public service companies. A lot of them are looking for standards to hold their vendors and to guide them on their journey. So I have to imagine that they are, but I just haven't seen very many examples. Not at all. Very few. Yeah.
All right. This question is from John Lowe. He's asking if, and maybe you can send some information out afterwards, but for those of you on the call that are going to Knowledge or ServiceNow customers going to Knowledge, can you send us any conference session related information that will be on IT4IT at the conference?
Yeah, well, the best way to look, because it's still kind of fluid, there's sessions coming on and off the agenda, is go and just do a search on the agenda on the sessions, and then for IT4IT, last time I did that, there was, I think, 5 or 6 sessions that had IT4IT mentioned in there. But being part of the company, I'm actually looking at some of those myself, some of the material, and IT4IT isn't pronounced in there, but it is mentioned, right, in the abstract or in the title in some of the sessions. So I would just say go take a look, and you'll find them. There's one from a company called Veolia, Viola, I think that's what it's called. It's mentioned in there, and there's one that I'm going to be doing possibly with Intel. We'll have a mention in there, but it's not, again, prominent. We'll just mention it. But again, it's just not the subject of a presentation. It's just going to be an ingredient. It's something that was used to help focus the discussion, or some of the terminology we used are going to be strategy portfolio, request to fulfill. So you're going to see the terminology start just emerging from the conversations that are happening in those events, in those sessions.
Great. And I just want to be clear, I do want to remind the group or the attendees that you don't have to be a ServiceNow customer to attend the conference. So
Not at all.
If you interpreted that, what I was saying, that's not correct at all. You don't have to be a customer. Appreciate it. Okay. Sheila is mentioning that John Spurkle, if any of you know him, he's actually hosting a panel discussion on brokering digital services. It will include an IT4IT discussion. And for the group's benefit, as Knowledge gets closer, I will list on the ITSM Google site a list of relevant higher ed focused sessions. So you can go to this page. It's a good resource for knowing what sessions that we think are valuable for higher ed. So Sheila just added that the panelists will be from higher ed and local government. So I will include that session in the information that I share out later.
Yeah, and John, I've talked to John many times, and he's also interested in contributing to the open group and standards and white papers, guidance, that sort of thing. And just the last commercial there, if we don't have any questions, is that it is an open standard, and for educational organizations, it's a relatively inexpensive. Open group is inexpensive to join and to interface with, is to kind of help evolve, right? Learn from other folks like ourselves. We don't have all the answers still either, but we're evolving it, and we're actually gearing up to a version 3 release at the end of the year. So we've had a lot of feedback. Some areas aren't well defined. The creation of all this guidance materials, there's guidance on metrics and reporting that's been created. There's a SIAM paper that's been created. So there's a lot of other things that have been created, but so we're kind of cycling through the versioning of the books and also the education. So that's not going to happen probably till the end of this year, but that's expect to see that. But please, if you want to get involved, and I can help direct you to get up on board.
Hey, John, if you can, I turned your mic on. So aren't you doing some work currently with the University of California education system on using or implementing IT4IT?
Maybe he's still on mute.
Yeah, but put him on the spot there. But yeah, I believe there's some work going on currently with the University of California system. Some of their institutions are doing some work with ServiceNow and helping to build out some of this processes.
Yeah.
John, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, we're working with the UCs, but it's there's about 16 people on that group, but we're following it as a guideline right now, but nobody has officially adopted it like the CIO level. But we're getting the ServiceNow teams that are kind of adhering to that and building out their configuration management database and everything, and how do they use IT4IT to start structuring that with business services.
And if anybody that might be a customer or interested in knowing more about it, can they reach out to you? Can I send them your contact information, or how can they learn more?
Yeah, that'd be great. Send them my contact information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will do.
And you're local here, right, in Southern California, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Orange County.
Okay. Yeah, and when it comes to, I just don't engage with enough customers to get that feedback, but I think this is a standard that's going to get bigger. It's going to get more, I would say, prolifically used, and just baked in. I get requests from customers now using the terminology, which I had no idea they were using it, right? They had apparently adopted it. And when it comes to that operating model level, that's an area that we found a lot of these consultancies that come in with that level of they give that kind of a consulting advice. They're baking IT4IT into that too. And the operating model guidance that we're creating will address those use cases. And the compelling deliverable there is a set of examples. So we've got a lot of folks that are donating their examples of operating models they've created in context of different companies, different size, different scale, different business areas. So it's going to be exciting. We'll address that area as well.
Well, great. I think we're out of time. Thank you, Mark. This concludes the presentation. Again, appreciate it, Mark, for sharing your time, insight with us today. I will send out his contact information and John's contact information if you want to learn more about IT4IT, or if you're a ServiceNow customer and want to learn more about what they're doing with the UC system and service portfolio in general. We're always looking for fresh ideas. So if you've got a topic or an interest, I've got a platform. If you've got a voice, reach out to me. I'll make sure we'll plan something for you. Just a reminder that this session was recorded. The transcripts and the recording will be available within 5 business days on the ITSM CG Google site. It's a great place to look at upcoming events and also to look at past recordings. Lots of great resources on there, white papers, toolkits, and past recordings. Thanks again, Mark, for your time, and of course, the audience for taking time out of your business schedule to attend. Everyone have a nice day.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye, everyone.